What's up, Star Wars nerds, and welcome to another episode of Brett on Fit. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the recent Hasbro announcement for the new vintage collection Boba Fett in the vintage KENNER colors. And then we're going to be discussing the vintage collection VC numbering system with a focus on the anomalies and the missing numbers for certain figures. Let's get to it. Welcome back to the channel. This is episode 40 of Brett on Fit. And like I said before, we're going to first start by talking about the recent Hasbro announcement for the new vintage collection Boba Fett in the vintage KENNER style colors. We're very excited for this release, so let's take a closer look at what we are getting.
Alright, so here's some images of the new Boba Fett figure Hasbro revealed last week for the vintage collection. As you can see, it's got that vintage KENNER style paint job, which is so awesome, and it's on the classic Star Wars Boba Fett card back. Now, we've gotten something very similar before for the Black Series. This is that 40th anniversary San Diego Comic-Con exclusive, and one of my favorite pieces in my collection. I just thought this was a brilliant idea, putting those vintage colors on a modern figure. And he is looking great in 3 3/4 scale. This, of course, is another repaint from that Return of the Jedi Boba Fett VC 186, which is the best Boba Fett we have in 3 3/4 scale so far. Of course, they have repainted this one before with the Droids Boba Fett, another one of the favorites from my collection. And so it's just great to have this vintage style color scheme on a very good modern style figure. Now in the UK, this figure already went up for pre-order in limited quantities through various fan channel sites and I believe Pulse UK. But here in North America, it is a Target exclusive and the pre-orders will begin on November 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Target exclusive? What if he doesn't survive the packaging and mailing process? He's worth a lot to me.
Well, I would recommend ordering 2 to increase your chances of getting at least one undamaged, and then you can keep the damaged one as an opener. If they're both damaged, you can keep one as an opener and return the other to your local Target for a full refund. Or you can try your luck on the secondary market, or see if fan channel sites in the UK, such as Star Action Figures, get more in stock.
He's no good to me, Deed.
I certainly understand your concerns, but if I'm being honest, I've had much better luck with Target versus Walmart, who put stuff in mailer bags. Target doesn't ever use mailer bags for these figures. They generally come in properly sized boxes. It's just sometimes they don't pack them so great. But more times than not, I've received my figures in pretty good condition from Target. So personally, I'm not too concerned that it's a Target exclusive, and I'm just very excited to finally be getting this KENNER style colored Boba Fett. I've been wanting this in 3 3/4 scale ever since they gave us this in the Black Series.
Alright, with the speculation over what number the new vintage collection Boba Fett may receive, or if it'll receive a number at all, got me thinking about all the anomalies across all the different figures. Just a minute.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. That was getting a little ridiculous. So like I was saying, you know, the speculation over what they're going to assign as far as a VC number or no number at all to this new KENNER style Boba Fett got me thinking about all the different anomalies across the vintage collection line. And so I wanted to take the time to summarize all those anomalies, the errors, the figures that have no number assigned to them, and put it all in one summary for this video. So let's go over them. Okay, so in case you're watching this and you are not a collector of vintage collection, or maybe you're a newer collector, the standard numbering system for TVC is VC numbers. And so VC01, for example, is the very first vintage collection figure, and that's Dengar, and that was from back in 2010, and the highest and most recent number we know of is VC-263, the artillery stormtrooper, which will be coming out in 2023. Now I'm going to be going over all the instances where Hasbro veered away from this standardized number system for whatever reason, sometimes a very good plausible reason, sometimes maybe questionable. And I'm also going to be going over some instances where maybe Hasbro should have considered doing something different with the numbering. And I'll be also talking about errors and duplications, that sort of thing. Now the purpose of this is not to complain or to bash Hasbro on mistakes. A lot of these decisions admittedly were very tough, I'm sure. Some of these you could just flip a coin on which way to go. This is simply to go over all the different instances where the numbering for a figure seemed to change or be inconsistent or was missing, and to hopefully shed some light on some of the reasons for those. Now, one thing I want to get out the way early on is the topic of reissues. Now, Hasbro has reissued a number of figures years after their original release, and for these, Hasbro has consistently always used the same exact VC number for these reissues. And it's not that big of a deal, but personally I would have preferred, since a lot of these reissue figures have updates to them, and the backs of the card backs at least are different than the originals, I would have preferred that they used a modified VC number, such as putting an A at the end. So like in this case, the reissue Princess Leia could be VC02A. And I think that would just help distinguish the original from the reissue for collectors. But at least Hasbro is being consistent with this decision, and that's a good thing. And another thing I won't be getting into on this discussion is the foil chase variants for figures. Hasbro did a lot of these early on, and they retain the same exact VC number, and I'm totally fine with that since this is just a minor variation of the card back and it doesn't really alter the image or the figure itself. Alright, I'm going to try my best to go in chronological order based on when these figures were released. And I'm also going to mix in some videos of some of the figures that I have just to break up the monogamy. And the first instances where Hasbro veered away from the standard VC numbering was with VCP 01, 02, and 03. Now VCP in this case stands for Vintage Collection Promotional. And the first VCP figures was VCP 0102, and it was Vorlom and Zuckuss in this nice 2-pack. This was a Comic-Con exclusive where they used the original Vintage Kenner colors and the original Vintage Kenner name swap on Vorlom and Zuckuss. So really cool package. And VCP 03 was this really cool mail-away exclusive Kenner style Boba Fett with the rocket firing jetpack. You can see there in the corner it says VCP03, and very neat item. Again, not a standard mainline figure. This was a mail-away exclusive, and I think Hasbro got it right for the numbering system for these figures. These were special exclusive figures. They were not part of the main line, and so I like that special designation with the VCP. However, unfortunately, Hasbro did not continue this designation. VCP03 was the last time they used that type of number. Now I'm going to be going over a number of instances where a figure had multiple card back variants and retained the same VC number, or in some cases did not retain the VC number. And starting with Darth Vader, we had VC08. He had a Empire Strikes Back card, a Return of the Jedi card, and then a Revenge of the Jedi card. All kept the number VC08. Well, then sometime later, Hasbro finally put out Vader on a regular Star Wars card. Again, same image, just a Star Wars card back, and numbered it VC93. So just noting some inconsistency there. However, the VC93 Vader, the figure itself, does have some minor changes, and so perhaps that was the reasoning for Hasbro to give it a new VC number. Next up is the VC09 Boba Fett. Like Vader, this was released on an Empire Strikes Back card, a Return of the Jedi card, and a Revenge of the Jedi card. All the same figure, all VC09. So they handled this consistently with how they handled the Vader. And in this case, there wasn't a regular Star Wars release for that figure, other than that special mail-away rocket firing Fett we talked about earlier, and then of course the newly announced Kenner Colors Boba Fett. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not they give that a special number or just leave it blank. My gut tells me it will be blank, no number for that one. All right, this next one is a bit of a doozy. VC-23 Luke Skywalker, when they put this figure out, the figure itself had Luke's outfit from later in the film when he's on Endor. However, the card back image they used was from the Jabba's Palace scene earlier in the film, and so it wasn't the right image. And they called it Jedi Knight outfit, by the way. And then they corrected this and used the right image from Endor and called it Luke Skywalker Endor, and then changed it to Luke Skywalker Endor Capture. And there was a Return of the Jedi version and then a Revenge of the Jedi version. And then much later, they put out a figure consistent with his look from Jabba's Palace and labeled it VC-175 Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight. Next up, we have VC-26 the Rebel Commando. And there was 2 figure variants for this one, both with the figure and the card back. Starting with the Return of the Jedi one is a white version of the figure, and then the Revenge of the Jedi one is a black version of this figure. And so you've got a change in the figure and the card back, yet they retain the same exact VC-26 number. So a bit of inconsistency here, not because of the Revenge of the Jedi part, they kept the same numbers for that in other releases, of course, but because the figure is a different figure, I'm surprised that Hasbro did not go with a modification of the VC number for that one. Next up is VC-36, the Senate Guard from Attack of the Clones. This is an interesting one because, like the Luke Skywalker, they created a completely alternative card back image. However, in this case, both are correct. It's not a correction, they just went with a different image for some reason. So I just wanted to note this as another instance where you have 2 significantly different card backs for the same figure and retaining the same VC number. Next is a very similar situation to the VC-08 Darth Vader. It's the VC-41 Stormtrooper. This was initially released on both an Empire Strikes Back card, a Return of the Jedi card, and then a Revenge of the Jedi card, all under the VC-41 designation. However, recently this past year, Hasbro gave us a Stormtrooper on the regular Star Wars card and designated as VC-231. And this was a completely new Stormtrooper from the ones we originally got with VC-41, so probably the reasoning behind the new VC number designation. Next up is VC-61 Boba Fett in the prototype armor, and I have to admit this one has always irked me because this was another special mail-away exclusive figure. He's not canon with the film, and so this would have been a perfect opportunity for another VCP number. To me, this should have been VCP-04, but instead they gave it VC-61, and it does boggle my mind as to why they made that decision. Next up, we have VC-66 and VC-67, the Salacious Crumb and Mouse Droid. These were special exclusive figures that came with that awesome San Diego Comic-Con Death Star 2 pack for Revenge of the Jedi. And these are special because they made them in a much smaller size. They're obviously very small figures, and the card backs are much smaller than the standard Vintage Collection card backs. And so for that reason and that reason alone, I felt like these should have been given special promotional VC number designations, either VCP or something else, anything but the mainline standard VC numberings for these, because they just don't go with the rest of the main line. Next is the specialty wave known as the Lost Line, which is where Hasbro took 6 different Vintage Collection figures and repacked them on alternate card backs. And these alternate card backs were based on original concepts from Kenner that were eventually scrapped in favor of what we ended up getting. And there's one figure from each of the episode movies, and they assigned their own special numbering system for these based on that. So EP 101 is episode 1, EP 202 is from episode 2, and so on. And I thought this was a good way for numbering these figures and keeping them separate from the main line. And as you can see, for example, the EP2, the O2 is in a separate color to kind of separate it. It's like episode 2, and this is also figure 2 of this line. So I like the way they did that. I thought that was pretty good. Next up is the first vintage collection figure to not receive any kind of number on the back, and it is the Jar Jar in Carbonite. This was an exclusive figure to that awesome carbon freezing chamber collector set that came out exclusively for the 2012 San Diego Comic-Con. That set also came with those Lost Line figures we showed previously. However, those figures were not exclusive to this set. Those figures were also sold in retail. However, the Jar Jar was exclusive, and so it is very expensive in the secondary market. It's considered a holy grail item for many TVC collectors. And so, because it was special and exclusive, Hasbro chose to go with no number. In this instance, again, they probably could have gone with a VCP designation, but chose not to. And next, we have our second vintage collection figure that was not assigned any kind of number, and that is Jocasta Nu from Attack of the Clones. This was a Brian's Toys exclusive figure, a really awesome set. And so clearly at this point in time, Hasbro was going with the decision to just use no numbers for any kind of special or exclusive figures. In 2019, we got our first ever HasLab product, that being the Vintage Collection Jabba's Sail Barge, an awesome ship, a dream item for any Vintage Collection collector. And to sweeten the pot, Hasbro included a special Yak Face figure on a Star Wars Power of the Force card. And to number this one, they decided to go with a VC000 number, and this one baffled me a little bit because they went with the 3 digits, and so I guess they thought, okay, with these HasLabs, we're going to start these with 3-digit numbers, and this just did not make any sense to me, and I think it later on didn't really make sense to Hasbro either, because as we'll see later in this video, they ended up changing the numbering system for HasLab exclusive figures. Okay, next is VC150, the Princess Leia Organa Yavin. Now with this one, VC150 was originally scheduled to actually be Darth Revan, but they were going to just repack the 30th anniversary Revan for this one instead of creating a newly tooled Revan. And when collectors caught wind of this, they actually complained so much that Hasbro ended up canceling that production for Revan. Well, that left a vacant VC150 number, so Hasbro decided to assign that to this Princess Leia. However, they had already started production on Princess Leia under her original designated number, which was VC164. So we ended up getting a number of VC164 Princess Leias out there before they corrected it to VC150. And then, to make things worse, since they abandoned the 164 number, they ended up reassigning that to the first figure from the Mandalorian series, which was Cara Dune. And so therefore you end up with 2 different VC numbers for Princess Leia and a duplication of a VC number between Princess Leia and Cara Dune, both VC164. Next up is VC162, the Sith Trooper from Rise of Skywalker. And this is an interesting one. So Hasbro decided to release an alternate version of this trooper that came with extra weapons, known as an armory pack. And so the armory pack actually had a slightly different card back image, and of course it came with all these accessories. And so for this one, Hasbro actually gave it a modified VC number of VC162A. And I thought this was a really good move. I thought this is something they should have been doing a long time ago for significant variants on figures. So they got this one right in my opinion. But unfortunately, it would be the first and last time Hasbro would use this type of numbering. Next up is the Carbonized line. This was in 2 waves, both for The Mandalorian, and this is where they repacked Vintage Collection figures and repainted them in a glossy metallic type of paint. And with these, they once again went with no number at all on the card backs, starting a trend of using no numbers for specialty waves. Next up, we got another duplication error. VC-177 was assigned to both the Din Djarin special pack with Grogu as well as the Incinerator Trooper. Now, one of these figures was supposed to be assigned VC-176, but through some mistake, they were both assigned VC-177, leaving us collectors once again with two completely different figures sharing the exact same VC number designation, which is very frustrating for many of us. And so that actually left a vacancy for VC-176, which Hasbro would later fulfill by assigning it to ARC Trooper Echo, who in turn was originally supposed to be assigned the number VC-188. More on that later. The next specialty wave following the carbonized waves for the Vintage Collection was the Droids wave, where they repacked 3 different Vintage Collection figures and completely repainted them in the style of the old Droids animated series and put them on these awesome vintage style Droids card backs. So, like they did with the carbonized, for this specialty wave, they again went with no numbers on the backs. Next, we got our second Vintage Collection HasLab, that being the Razor Crest ship, which came with 2 exclusive carded figures, the Grogu and the Offworld Jawa Elder. And for these, Hasbro decided to go back to the drawing board as far as their numbering system for these exclusive HasLab figures, and gave them a completely new numbering system, HAS, short for HasLab. So Grogu got HAS 001 and the Jawa got HAS 002. I thought this was a good move. This is what they should have started with the Jabba's sail barge Yak Face. I only wish they could go back in time and rename that one as HAS 000. Next up, we got yet another duplication error for the VC numbers. How, at this point, this continued to happen is beyond me. But anyways, VC-211 was assigned to both the Mandalorian and Grogu Maldu Kreese special figure pack and the Elite Squad Trooper from that Bad Batch 4-pack. Now, the Elite Squad Trooper was the correct figure to receive VC-211 because the other figures in that 4-pack it came with were VC-208, 209, and 210. So the mistake here lies with the Mandalorian and Grogu Maldo Kreese. And finally, I mentioned earlier how the ARC Trooper Echo was originally supposed to be assigned the VC-188, but then was reassigned to VC-176 to fill that hole left from the fiasco with the Mandalorian Grogu pack and the Incinerator Trooper. Well, by doing that, we were left a gap for VC-188 for a very long time until recently this past year, Hasbro decided to fill that void with the Magna Guard from the Jedi Survivor 3-pack. Now, while I'm glad they filled that number, I just don't understand why they chose this figure to do it with. It makes the least amount of sense to me because this figure came in a 3-pack, with the other 2 figures in the pack being designated as VC-255 and VC-256. So this is a nightmare for OCD collectors like myself when you have a 3-pack where 2 of the figures are consecutive numbers and the 3rd figure is way different. And so to date, this one makes the last of the VC numbering anomalies, errors, or omissions that I could find. Alright, so that's going to do it for this episode of Brett on Fett. Let me know in the comments what you think about the new Vintage Kenner colored style Boba Fett for the Vintage Collection. And I hope you enjoyed my segment on the VC numbering system and found it useful. Thanks so much for watching the video. Thank you so much to my subscribers. Don't forget, you can also follow me on Instagram and on Twitter. Take care, and we'll see you next time.